Hello, good afternoon. Michael Wynn, Chief Digital Officer of Digital Ops, a division of RB Oppenheim Associates. Thanks for joining in today to the Digital Marketing Podcast and video series, where we talk about digital marketing strategies and tactics to help grow your business. Today, I want to take a deep dive into the 5 essential components of executing highly successful micro campaigns. So I think what we're seeing over the last probably 18 months or so is this evolution of a strategy of executing micro campaigns. I don't know, we've not really labeled it or thought of it as that, but that's really what it is. And I think that in 2020, we're going to see the maturing of this process really start to permeate throughout the marketing landscape as more and more brands begin to understand and shift away from this linear TV thinking or this single piece of creative where we're trying to, reach the masses, right? We've pivoted away from that, and now we're going to how can we make our messages more personal and more contextual, especially to our very segmented audience groups. So today's sort of 5 components is what I want to break down, not only what we've seen in executing campaigns at a local level, at a regional level, as well as at a national level. Here are the 5 components that I think every successful micro campaign will have. And first of all, I think it's important to understand that an entire marketing campaign will have these micro campaigns within them, and they must have it. It must be a part of the overall strategy, because if you don't, you're not getting the feedback loop, the feedback data loop that you need in order to be nimble with your campaigns. And I think that is what we saw in 2019 was the ability to interpret the data and adapt the campaign in order to, be able to shift. And we'll talk more about that as we kind of dive into these 5 components. So number 1 is segmentation. Segmentation is really breaking down your target audience. And I know that as marketers, we've done a good job in the past of our demographic breakdown. I mean, we just excel. Like, we know the age group, we know, the geography of where they're located. And then we start to kind of layer on, past behaviors, whether it's, previous purchases or, previous attendance to events or, various activities, whether they are, a purchase history or a transactional history, or an attendance history, whatever that might be. I think the one thing that has been missing and that really starts to come alive when we talk about the data interpretation in these micro campaigns is that you really begin to understand the interests. And that's really key in looking forward to how can I execute a successful marketing campaign through these little sort of micro campaigns. And I have to really understand the interests and then build on those interests, right? Okay, so the segmentation is really a breakdown of interest, past behaviors, and the demographic information that you have. So when you're able to segment that, and I mean, the more you segment, the better. And I think that's really, really key in what we've learned, because when you deploy, this contextual creative that we've talked about, on the show for the last year, the data that comes behind that, when you have 67 different pieces of creative running that are literally like little micro campaigns, a part of a larger campaign, you really start to have some data that you can say, okay, young women, located in state XYZ are really responding to message B, as opposed to that same set, responding to the other things. And I mean, this all can go into like what we talked about yesterday on yesterday's show, the psychology of color and how that impacts, the creative. But in this particular, sort of what we're talking about when we move into number 2, which is the contextualization of your creative and your messaging, what this is really about capturing micro moments. You really have to envision, okay, where is that moment where the target audience is experiencing the problem, right? You know that your product or service is the answer to or solves that problem, but how can you capture that moment? How can you capture that pain point and speak directly to that moment? How do you re-envision that moment? Because what happens, and we've talked about this quite a bit, is when brands are able to do that, their message comes across in an empathetic tone. And individuals like that. Individuals like to have the brand acknowledge that they have frustrations, or they have fears, or they have anxiety about their product or service, and then address those, right? So, and I think contextualization can also be thought of as, almost like creating little mini series. We've talked a lot about before and on numerous occasions where we talk about you've got to shift away from this mentality of being the commercial and start becoming the show, become the actual content that they want to consume, not the interruption of the content. So thinking in terms of contextualization, almost like a mini series. Number 3 is personalization. Again, personalization, we've talked about this just over and over, and I'm not going to talk about anything new because this is absolutely where we are. My Netflix is different than your Netflix. Your Pandora channel is different than my Pandora channel, and on and on. The way that we are personalizing the content in our entire lives on how we consume content, how we order products, all the different ways that we are personalizing the experience. And so your micro campaigns have to have that personalization. And so it's a true pivot away from mass appeal. It's really a pivot away from that. And it's really moving towards individualization and creating content around that. So number 4 is localization. Localization is having that person that interacts with or sees or reads or listens to your content, envisioning that this is actually happening like in their front yard. We had a recent comment on one of our client ads, and they literally said, like, how do you know that I'm in this place? Like, how do you know I'm in this county? And I mean, we're geo-targeting, right? I mean, and we're writing ads that say, hey, so and so and so and so county. Like, we're really personalized. We're creating that personalization. We're creating that contextual moment, and we're giving it localization. Like, and what happens is you can't stop. But when you're scrolling through a feed or you're on a website and you come across something and it's like, hey, Michael, who lives on such and such street, did you know that? I'm like, you can't help but to stop. Like, oh my gosh, how do they know? Like, right? It's like they're reading my mail. Like, and so I know that comes across creepy, but really, if you do it properly, it comes across as authentic, and it really is. It gives your brand a real, like, okay, this is in my backyard. This is happening in my front yard. Like, this is in my town. This is me. This is for me. This is for the people that live around me. So that localization is huge. And then number 5 is data interpretation and adaptation. Again, we were recently kind of working with a client, and we were reviewing some of their analytical numbers from Q3 as we were preparing for creative for Q1 for 2020. And, as we're looking through it and then we're comparing it with the real-time data that's happening right now in Q4, we're like, look, here's a trend. And this piece of creative, this particular micro campaign topic matter is really, just germinating, an amazing amount of information. And so, yeah, we're creating more content similar to that, but we're also using it as a springboard to say, well, if you were interested in this, you might be interested in this. You see that all the time when you go and you're, shopping on Amazon or you're shopping on eBay and you look at an item and then here's 3 other suggestions. And sometimes those other suggestions are right on point. You're like, yeah, I want to check that out. But that information comes because, you've got this behavior data and then this product recommendation or service recommendation that's saying this thing is like this thing. And so, when you're able to observe this, really sort of deep dive, this really granular details of very specific, these micro campaigns that are running, that are a part of a much larger overall campaign set, you're really starting to get some insight that you would not have had if you would have just ran a single piece of creative and then had all the different audience groups and all the different locations and all the different behaviors. You could have put that stuff in, but you wouldn't know that segmentation when it comes to interests, right? And then be able to build off of that. So again, the 5 points that we're talking about here is segmentation, which is really a breakdown of interest, past behaviors, demographic information. Number 2, contextualization, which is creating those micro moments and storytelling in a mini series approach. Number 3, that personalization, which is a pivot from mass appeal more towards individualization. Number 4, localization. Let them feel like this is in their front yard and that it's authentic to the area where they live. And then number 5 is that data interpretation and adaptation, so that you can observe the information, the data, the trends, and then adapt that and be nimble in your campaigns, pull down the lower performing, ad creative sets, and then add to or change out that creative so that you can reach those segments that are underperforming. So again, this is just really an observation of what we've seen over the last, probably 18 months or so in 2019. But I think we're going to go through this, sort of maturity of this, contextual creative at scale, and people are going to start calling it micro campaigns. You're going to see that and hear that, a lot as we move into 2020. Because that's what it is. And people can go, okay, I get it. It's a little piece, right? And that's what the success of, really being able to segment and contextualize and personalize and localize and adapt your data when you have these little micro campaigns running as part of an overall campaign. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in today. My name is Michael Wynn. I am the Chief Digital Officer of Digital Ops, a division of RB Oppenheim Associates. I hope you have a great day and tune in next time.